Now, I don't know what it is just yet, but you'll have to excuse the potentially terrible gameplay in the background. I finally got away from using Razer Nagas, which break on me all the time, and so I've got new binds to fiddle with on my new Logitech G600. So that's going to be the footage of the background, me playing badly, possibly. I did promise you guys a Q&A. Well, here we go. So every week, you guys can submit questions to me. We'll pick out some interesting ones. We'll get some cool discussion going on. Yet last week, I said this was going to be a super Q&A, and then we kind of messed up with the posting. So the post is now live. People who are on Patreon have the opportunity to ask me questions of any length, and they'll get hopefully longer answers than normal and on basically any topic. So that's in the description if you guys want to check it out. But for today, I pulled a bunch of messages from the YouTube comment section. Some of them were really good. Let's see what we've got here. So the first one is from Orca Love 261. Orca Love. Surely you don't mean the animal. They said, do you actually think ArenaNet will let us play as Tengu or Koden? ArenaNet has generally been good about listening to the fan base and giving us thoughts on what we want, but they have been very quiet about a playable race. I'm very curious about your thoughts on the matter of more playable races being added in the future and would like to hear your thoughts on the matter. Well, so listen, this question gets asked all the time, and that's really why I'm answering it here. I try to avoid repeating myself too much all the time. Everyone is interested in this, and I understand why. It's a thing that MMOs do. It's something I personally would be very excited about. I think that this would be an expansion selling thing, but I'm not sure that they're doing it. I did a long video on this entire topic on the potential of all the different races and the problems that they struggle with in terms of making new armors and weapons, and how much we see they struggle already with just the 5 races that currently exist. And so I'm not sure whether it ever really will happen. Honestly, though people keep asking me the same question, my thoughts haven't really changed, and no facts are any different really since I made that video. So I'll drop a link for you if you're interested in that as well. But I think the only thing that's different since I made that was the Everlasting Tonics coming into Living World Season 3, which are cool, and we got like the Kodan tonic. But if anything, they probably don't matter much, and if they did matter, it's probably a knock against the chances of other races, right? Especially with like the Koden. You can kind of already play as one, you just can't customize it. And I get it, it's not a worthy substitute, but it's not a good sign. So moving on, let's go to the next question. Rod Weiler, who says, good afternoon, WP. Good afternoon to you too, Rod. He says, if you were in charge of designing Polymock for Guild Wars 2, how would you go about it? So, a lot of people probably hear the word Polymock, but it's such an old thing now. And it really only mattered for Guild Wars 1. And within Guild Wars 1, people who were playing around Eye of the North, not even like GW1, the first 3 big releases, a lot of people might not even think about it. If there's anything I've noticed, there used to be a lot of hype for that has died down and died down and died down and just kind of been hand-waved for years now. To the point that the community doesn't seem to mind so much. It's Polymock, so I was quite curious to see a question about Polymock here today. Obviously, we had that stuff in the PvP lobby hinting at some kind of new game, but there was nothing Polymocky like it. We saw that blog post as well I did a video on in the week where we saw mini-pet battles. And I think that that's the direction that I would take Polymock in for Guild Wars 2. I would base it on minis. So if you guys don't know, this is a bit like Triple Triad that you had in Final Fantasy VIII. It's a bit like a minigame you find in a lot of online games, where essentially you get to take control of a deck of creatures. And these are like, you know, playing pieces that represent various enemies and things around the world, and you play off against someone else who's using theirs, and then the winner, you know, gets some kind of a prize. It was originally described by the devs in the Eye of the North days. I think Colin Johansson specifically, maybe he was working on a lot, I can't quite remember, but I think this is his quote, that it was Pokemon on steroids, that it was supposed to be like supercharged Pokemon. And what this was a turn-based game. Nothing about Guild Wars is really turn-based, but this was quite strictly a turn-based game built with the Guild Wars 1 combat system, and it was pretty fun. It essentially, in Eye of the North, was just one long quest chain, and you'd do the quest chain and you'd enjoy these little games, but you could never play against other players. It was never like a big feature fixture, and the thought was, okay, well, they're introducing this to us in Eye of the North because this is just one on a pile of many things that will go into the real MMO. Guild Wars 2 is going to be an actual MMO with a persistent world and so forth, and features like this presumably would be coming. And we saw when Guild Wars 2 came out in 2012 that there was a planned Polymock arena. We see from some of these early, you know, work in progress UI things that they had some ideas for mini battles and stuff, but none of it came through in the end. So how would I do it? Well, I would base it on minis. I would have, essentially, you can turn a mini into either the mini version of it or a polymock piece. You could like trade minis 1-for-1 into polymock pieces, and then the polymock pieces, you get to when you're playing polymock, you take control of that creature, you occupy its skills. It's kind of this fun way of being able to experience what it's like to play the game as one of these mobs, and you get the mob's ability. Imagine if you as a ranger could take control of your pets for a little while, and you'd have a limited skill bar of 4 to 5 skills, and it would feel a lot like that, which is essentially how it worked in Guild Wars 1, but I would definitely tie it to minis. That would make minis very interesting to me. But there's other things I'd do too. I would love to have like betting as associated with the system. I would of course make this more than just like a quest chain thing. This would be something you can right click and challenge people to polymock, or if you go to a certain area of the world like the polymock arena, then you can play against other people for specific rewards. I'd have trading available as well. So one big thing of polymock in GW1 was if you beat your opponent, you could take one of his things out of his deck, or if he beat you, he could take one of your pieces out of your deck, and this was one of the primary ways you got new polymock pieces. But also they would come very rarely from certain places like dungeon rewards, and so I love that idea as well. I love the idea that if you wanted a polymock scale, you could go kill Scale out in the open world, and you'd have like an ultra rare chance for that Scale to drop a polymock version of itself, and then you could use that as a piece. And maybe you could have polymock pieces based on bosses that appear in various places. It would be really, really, really cool. That's essentially the way that I would like to do it. And yeah, maybe have references to the old GW1 stuff. It would be very, very, very awesome. I think Guild Wars 2 definitely lacks something that fills that space. You know, we can't duel, we can't challenge people to mini games like this, and that big social interaction of fighting other people to win their pieces to build your own collection, I really like. And of course, the other kind of big MMO-y thing for like that casual side of stuff and that social side of stuff, I think is fishing. You might not think of fishing as a social feature, which I think are very important for MMOs, but it kind of is, because it's very AFK heavy, and the more AFK heavy something is, the more you can talk to people around you, the more fun you can have in that respect. So yeah, that's the way I would do polymock. We could probably talk about it a lot more, but let's get on to the next question. So next one's from Der mit dem Blunt, who, does that mean something in another language? He says, what is your opinion on phasing? He says, as we all know, Guild Wars 2 maps are frozen in time at the moment. But wouldn't it be much more immersive if we could, for example, see the dome over Divinity's Reach when we're at that story Living World step, when we're in Queensdale, and maybe some even new dialogue like citizens panicking because of the White Mantle attack? Other MMOs do this quite effectively, and I've always wondered why Guild Wars 2 doesn't utilize this. It's probably a time cost thing. Would really love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to be a time cost thing. It's funny because you use the word phasing there, and depending on what scale we talk about, there is phasing in Guild Wars. So they phase the maps themselves in this map is only at this period of time. When you're in Queensdale and you look toward Divinity's Reach, you can't see the dome. But when you're in Lake Doric, which is set further forward in time, and you look towards Divinity's Reach, you can see the dome. So that's kind of, but the other idea of phasing, which a lot of MMOs employ, is if you are on a specific story step, standing next to your friend who's not on that step, and you look in one direction, you might see an NPC, or you might see an effect or something there that your friend doesn't because he's on a different step. And that can lead to a little bit of confusion, and it can make the world feel slightly less immersive when you communicate with other people and you can see stuff that they can't. But MMOs do this to make their questing systems and things a lot more interesting and work. And Guild Wars 2 does that a bit less. I think that maybe Guild Wars 2 could employ a little more of that type of phasing, but the idea specifically of maps being frozen in time, which is the nub of what I think you're trying to get at, I actually really like this. I think this is a brilliant middle ground for Guild Wars 2 to be able to continue pushing its world, move through time, change areas, but not have to replace old content. And I know people like to talk about, oh, what if all got revamped? This doesn't feel alive enough. There should be big changes going on in all of these places. It all sounds very idealistic and wonderful and lovely, but I think these debates were settled in my mind in Living World Season 1. I think these questions were the exact things the devs thought would be cool as well, and they tried to push out with a Living World Season 1 format. And having gone through Season 1 and still doing my best to remember the problems that were there with Season 1, because as time continues going forward, people minimize what the problems were and they act like it was the best thing in the world. Season 1 was loathed by a great number of people. There was a definite sadness to it because of stuff being replaced, because of Lion's Arch getting destroyed, and they lamented what the original Lion's Arch looked like. And even when we got new Lion's Arch, there's still people who didn't like what the original one was. People missing old Kessex Hills, people missing a ton of different stuff. That idea of, oh, let's revamp, or it sounds good, but you also lose something. You lose lose classic ore. And classic ore is a part of Guild Wars 2 to me, and I would hate to see that gone forever. So the way that ArenaNet have done it now, I think is a brilliant middle ground, and I'm actually really happy. You want to see Divinity's Reach while it's under attack? Brilliant. Go to Lake Doric. You want to see Divinity's Reach as it was when the game came out and get that a normal, regular experience, that nostalgic experience perhaps even, go to Queensdale. If you want to see classic Lion's Arch, play the personal story, and it's there for you. You want to see new Lion's Arch, as it is actually in the current timeline, just go to Lion's Arch. We get the best of both worlds here. It's not perfect, and I think that the game does a poor job explaining this, because it is one of those kind of meta elements. And I also think the game has a problem when it like muddies things together. Like when you have Queensdale that is supposed to be set in the past, but it's also got White Mantle propaganda and bosses and Bloodstone infused creatures and stuff, and then it's like multiple time zones all at once. That stuff's a bit messy, but generally I think this is good, and I think lessons have been learned, and this is the way that they're doing it, and I would like them to keep doing it. Next one comes in from Victor Snyder, who says, "Hey WP, it's been a nice video as always, thank you." He says, "My question to you is about Boons. I remember a while back that you mentioned you thought the Boon system wasn't a particularly fun one. Now my question to you is, how do you think ArenaNet could revamp or rework Boons, maybe the profession-specific buffs too, to make it something more interesting and engaging?" You know, to be honest with you, I don't particularly remember any major thoughts that I've had on Boons. I have more sincere ones with Condis, with the way that ramp works in the game and the battle of condition application versus removal. But for Boons, I mean, there are some classic examples that I'd really like to see, but I think will basically never happen. And not because it's bad design, but because of server and engine limitations, I think is a real problem. But essentially, and some people will be familiar with these ideas, the way that stacking works, I'd like to see most, if not all, Boons be intensity stackers rather than duration stackers. I think that that would really fundamentally blow open buildcraft and the way we look at a lot of stuff. So my go-to example is regeneration, right? Regeneration currently, you can only have one stack on it, will only have a certain strength, and when you apply more regeneration on top of old regeneration, it just adds to the length up to a certain point. If that instead was intensity stacking, like Might is, you would have one stack of regeneration only heals you for a little bit per tick. But then if you built a build that just went overboard with tons of regeneration on it, regeneration on the runes, everywhere you possibly can, you're doing loads of water field combos, you know, you're a ranger that's shooting through your healing spring, stuff like that. If you just went mental with loads of regeneration, it would now actually have a purpose. This is not a build that currently has any use in the game, but now each tick of regeneration, you've got 13 stacks of regen on you. Now the ticks are actually starting to really get up there and they're starting to get stronger. And of course, with ideas like this, you don't take the stupid approach and just keep all the numbers the same. I'm not suggesting that we should be able to have regeneration 13 times stronger than it is. You would have it scale at different levels so that it's actually appropriate and works well. But this works with loads of different things. Think about protection. Protection, again, same situation. It's a flat, 33%, 40% if you're a Tempest. What if instead protection just gave you like 5% damage reduction, and you want to stack lots of protection on top of yourselves so that now you can get lots more up to a point, or eventually you get diminishing returns on these kinds of things. And now you have ideas of comboing lots of people, not just in one build, lots of protection, but also think about across a raid composition or even a 5-man composition. You can now have a reason to run an aura sharing Ellie and the Hammer Guardian at the same time and not feel like there's any weird overlap, stuff like that. I think that the more intensity stacking, the better. And so that's number one. But the other side of it as well, in terms of the Boon game, is Boon Strip. And this is very similar to what I'd like to see with conditions. Boon Strip, essentially, you'd introduce more Boon Strip to the game, but now instead of Boon Strip removing entire stacks at a time, it would remove numbers of a stack. So, you know, this is a really powerful Boon Strip ability that removes 5 stacks of intensity, or the entire thing if there's less than 5 on there, instead of just this very binary on-off kind of thing. And these are very similar ideas to what I have with conditions as well, because a lot of condition playstyle you would think is very ramp-focused, very attritive-focused. It's not. A lot of Condi builds just burst insanely hard, insanely quickly, and it's just a quick, can you cleanse or can you flip all the conditions immediately or not? And I think that's wrong. I don't think that the game does does well for that. I think that those kinds of experiences are covered by power builds, and for the game to be at its healthiest, you want a balance of all these different things, ramp play styles as well. So that's what I'd really like for Boons. We could go into it a lot longer. And another area of the combat as well, I think that, and Heart of Thorns did a lot to push us further. It made support much more viable. It made lots of different things more viable. But another thing I think that Guild Wars 2 combat misses still, within the combat itself, is this idea of setting up proper bursts, and I mean more within PvE here, but setting up big burst moments and coordinated spikes. Like, you have that in PvE, but it has to be enforced via hard mechanics right now, because we've got to the point where everything's like perma, right? Like, you're under perma quickness, and you're under perma fury, and you're under permanent this and permanent this and permanent this. I don't think that that's actually the healthiest thing. I like the idea of teams being able to coordinate their own bursts through the combat system itself. So imagine coordinating your own burn phase because you've just had your warrior pop on my mark, right? Or a ton of warriors pop on my mark to push the 25 vuln, and you know that it's not going to last very long anymore. And so at that precise moment, that's when you trigger your time warp, that's when you trigger your 25 might, that's when you tell everyone to use their high power cooldowns, and you try to like coordinate these things together. I think that when it's more in the player control like that, and it's built through the combat system itself, again, I think that leads to better build craft, better experiences, more interesting team speak situations and things like that. So these are areas I think that the combat could be pushed in more. But I don't know whether these things will ever really happen, because again, way back when the condition update happened, which was also adding just a ton of intensity, we saw a lot of pressure on servers and a lot of conservative attitudes coming from the devs, specifically because of the architecture. And I don't know how deep that still cuts into them, but I would assume probably quite a lot. So, moving on, Christian Zierbo says, what do you think of the adventures? No one seems to be into them, and we just see them as a drag. Some of them are even impossible to complete because of RNGesus. What do you think of the daily adventure chest could give you a ticket to instantly complete an adventure of your choice? All right, so you've loaded a ton of stuff in here. First of all, I don't think the idea of giving someone a ticket to insta-complete another adventure helps with adventures population, really. I think that's an awful idea. I think that's really silly. Awful, especially with the way that achievements and things work. The beauty of the adventures is taking this little area of the game with its own rule set and mastering it, not bypassing it because you got really good at, you know, the ley line race one, and now you can just bypass it because every day you do. I think that's awful. I think that's a terrible idea. I also disagree that some of them are impossible to complete because there's RNG involved with some of them. RNG can punish you on them, yes, but it doesn't mean that any of them are impossible to beat, and I guess by beat you mean gold, right? But what do I think generally? I really like the adventures. I think they were a great part of Heart of Thorns. Unfortunately, like many areas of Heart of Thorns, they were also a part of Heart of Thorns that sort of feel like they came and went, and it's probably a reward problem. I'm curious to see next expansion how they deal with this. My one note, and I think I've mentioned this before quite recently, I think adventures are actually perfect, not necessarily for expansion maps and big bulk releases. I actually think adventures are best, or would be best, if they came with living world seasons. Imagine if we had a single adventure on each of these living world maps. I think that would be brilliant because you get the population floods to that map. We have a lot of daily incentives and things to come in. We've got the new currencies that those new adventures and the new maps could also tie into. But you get these big populations of people who will run over there, and that competitive leaderboard aspect would be huge. And I actually think that if I got to see a new adventure on each map, I would really invest in that, and I'd get interested in that, and a lot of other people would too, and then it would flourish, because that's obviously where adventures shine, when you start looking at the leaderboards and stuff like that. So I think that they'd be amazing if they came with Living World, but I guess Living World doesn't have the budget or scope to do them, so we end up getting them in big block releases with expansions, and I think they don't shine as much there. So kind of a funny, weird thing. I wonder whether the devs feel the same way, and they'll change that eventually at some point. But yeah, that's generally what I think of adventures. I don't think they're the worst thing in the world, but that's generally where we are. And well, there you go, guys. I've already been talking for 20 minutes. Christ, I didn't get through many questions today. I'm so sorry. I probably rambled a little bit too long, but we're already at the end of the video. If this has given you guys any interesting ideas, if you want to leave some comments on some things I talked about here, or ask your own questions for in a couple of weeks when we get back to a regular Q&A, please do feel free. I always love reading all the comments. Even if, by the way, your question doesn't get picked, I will have read it. I go through all of the comments regardless. But thanks very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Tomorrow, I'll see you for some more juicy stuff. We've got more Tyrian Travels and things to read as well. So, should be very fun. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening, and take it easy.